Thanks for waking up and coming out here. Thank you, FITC, for having me. I come from San Francisco Bay Area, and I am very excited to talk about storytelling for social action. As Sean mentioned, I have a studio in the Bay called Cash Studios. We work on projects that aim to connect with people. And I work with Missing Pieces, which is a production company out of Los Angeles and New York, who are awesome. And I work with lots of different brands and startup companies, but today I'd like to speak specifically about some personal projects. And in starting, I want to reflect on what kind of year it's been. I think regardless of what side of the political spectrum one falls, it's hard to argue that this has been one of the most divisive starts to a year ever. And I'm just curious, you know, when we're in a time of division, I feel like oftentimes there's a sense of wanting to change things, wanting to do something. And just by a show of hands, how many people can relate to the sentiment of wanting to make a difference? Yeah, so this is a pretty common experience, one that I often feel. And how many would also agree that they want their voice to be heard in some way? That looks like pretty much everyone. And I'm really interested in these things, but then I often wonder, like, well, how the fuck do we do that? You know, what's the way in which we do share ourselves? And in some ways, you could say we're more able to express and communicate to a mass group of people than ever before, but I also think there are ways in which that's limited. And so social action beyond simply rallies and phone calls or letter writing, which are all have their merits, but I'm interested in like the 21st century modern solutions. And before going into that, we're up against a lot of odds, right? We have a 24/7 news cycle that is just constantly putting stuff out there, and it's really hard to cut into that and to cut through the clutter. This is a fun chart I found that shows 4 publishers and the stories and videos published per day, and it ends up being 1 story or a video every minute if you combine all 4 of those. So every single minute, one of these 4 publications is putting out new content, and that's just 4 out of however many. So it's really hard to cut through. Yes, social media is changing the way we protest or the way that we experience activism. There's real-time organizing, updates. However, there's also burnout. How many people here can relate to feeling burnt out from using something like Facebook during a time of political exhaustion? Right? It just gets like more and more stuff is coming at us. And so if social media is not the only answer, what is? And so what I'd like to talk about today is this idea of culture jamming, which is taking an idea or a message and creatively infusing it into pop culture. This is the Guerrilla Girls, and it says, do women have to be naked to get into the Met Museum? Less than 5% of the artists in the modern art sections are women, but 85% of the nudes are female. And I love how provocative that is. I'm a big fan of Banksy, and Banksy's been a huge inspiration on my work, since I don't believe in global warming. And finally, the Shepherd Fairy piece, We the People, that shows women of different backgrounds and was designed for people to take to protests. And to me, these 3 show the power of an idea. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about what that means. I think that ideas can, on a very drastic level, overthrow governments. They can change cultural paradigms. I've taught at Miami Ad School in San Francisco on ideation. I've taught a culture jamming class at California College of the Arts. And so I'm very passionate about how we as creatives, aka anyone sitting in this room, can take an idea and do things like raise awareness about an issue that's important, spark conversation, get people to have a dialogue about something, challenge preconceptions, so expand people's minds or open their minds. That's because the idea of an activist feels a little bit fringe or deviant to us. And I had a sociology instructor that really wanted to drive home this idea of all of the things that are like bedrocks of modern culture that we just accept have come from activism. And so it's not something that just a couple people are involved with, but it's actually something that a mass group of people participate in. So things like the 40-hour work week, things that we might take for granted, that came from May Day and a huge protest in Chicago in 1886. Women's suffrage, women's right to vote, 1913, huge protest. The civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. You know, these things didn't just happen. They came from all these people taking to the streets and, you know, infusing their passion and standing up for something they believed in. So Martin Luther King says, "The greatest sin of our time is not the few who have destroyed, but the vast majority who have sat idly by." Abby Hoffman, an activist from the 60s and 70s, says, "Democracy is not something you believe in or something you hang your hat on. It's something you do. You participate. Without participation, democracy crumbles and fails. If you participate, you win, and the future is yours." And so I guess if there's one takeaway from what I'm going to show you in this talk, I guess it's to hopefully make the idea of participating feel more accessible. And I think part of that is also figuring out, what do you give a damn about? What are you passionate about? You know, is it women's reproductive rights? Is it healthcare reform? Is it more sustainably sourced sushi, right? It could be whatever that is. I'd appreciate if everyone here can just take a second for themselves and think about, what do you give a damn about? What are you passionate about? And so through the rest of the talk, I want to share 5 projects that reflect what I give a damn about. And I'll share my process with you, starting with inspiration, then research, then design prototyping, then executing and sharing. You guys with me so far? Cool. So Deep Profiler, a couple of years back, Arizona was in the process of passing a bill called SB 1070, which essentially made it legal for any police officer to stop anyone that looked like a Latino and ask them for their documents. And this is a bill that is incredibly unjust, essentially made it legal to racially profile. And so some buddies and I, when we found out about this, we were really upset about it and wanted to do a piece to raise awareness about it. And we ended up siding on a kind of a satire piece, and we decided to produce a series of white people masks to allow people in Arizona to wear them and then avoid racially profiling, right? So the Deep Profiler removes reasonable suspicion. Being brown was never easy, but now due to SB 1070, it can get you thrown in jail. Deep Profiler allows you to print a mask of a friendly white person's face to wear while you're in Arizona. Now you can bask in the freedom and comfort of knowing you'll never be harassed by the police. And so we had this idea and did a quick comp and sort of realized that we had to act really fast to both parlay our excitement and inspiration into actually doing something and also to not miss the news cycle for it. And so we immediately went to Union Square, which was a park nearby where we all worked, and just started talking to white people and saying, "Hey, we're doing this project. Would you mind if we used your face as a mask?" And they were like, "Yeah, cool, go for it. Like, I want to be a part of that." And so we talked to a lot of people. Fun side note is that the baby in there, we asked his dad to be a mask, and he's like, "Oh no, I'm not comfortable with that, but you can use my child." So but it was really cool. We put it online, and it was neat to see people's reactions. People did print it out. Again, this is obviously meant as a total satire, but you know, our hope was that as people were sort of playing around with this, they were also being exposed to what was a very serious issue. And it was also cool because then the media started to take notice, and the press amplified the message. And so for us, every press article that came out then drove more awareness towards this unjust issue. And so eventually, a couple weeks later, a judge did put a hold on that bill, and it just felt really rewarding to be a part of that conversation. And from that project, I felt really clear that I wanted to do more creative work that helped fight for what I believe is right. And also just to say, as I share these projects, there might be one where you're like, "Oh, I don't agree with that philosophy or those values, and that's totally fine. My hope is that from this talk you will feel empowered to stand up for whatever you believe in rather than what I believe in. And the takeaway here is that inspiration doesn't last forever. I'm sure we've all had moments where we're excited about an idea and then we wait on it and then it doesn't happen because the inspiration passed. And the value of being relevant and of putting work out while media and news and people are interested in it. So this next project was inspired by a news article when the iPad was about to launch, and Steve Jobs was essentially saying that he was anti-pornography and wanted to censor the iPad. Does anyone remember that? A couple nods. And regardless of what your view on pornography was, my buddies and I, we felt like it was a violation of censorship and that it kind of violated freedom of speech. So we were a little bit peeved about that. And around the same time, we were all working at an ad agency, so we were kind of hyper aware of the messaging that we saw out and about. And the biggest media buy in the history of San Francisco was this iPad poster. And it was literally just these people on their iPads, and that was the whole series of ads. And it felt really dull, right? To just walk around from block to block and be confronted with these very uncreative, uninspiring ads. And we were having a beer one night and just kind of shit-talking these ads, and I think one of us was like, well, what if we put smut on the iPads? What if we did put pornography on the iPad, which is what Steve Jobs doesn't want, but as sort of a protest against censorship? And so the next step to that would be to measure the actual dimensions of that iPad. So here we are taking photos, and we use the dollar bill as kind of a reference here. And once we got the size, we downloaded this really handy UX PSD that allowed us to design within an iPad and match that up. And I'll go more into this process a little bit. And the biggest thing that we were able to take advantage of was the ad agency's plotter printer, which is over $5,000 machinery. And we were able to just print runs and runs of these to test out and to measure the dimensions. And if we didn't get the distortion totally right, we would just print more because we weren't paying for it. And that was a huge gift. So we did this the week of the Worldwide Developers Conference at Apple, and I'll just play I think it's a minute-long video that we launched with. And if we can get audio here. Can we get audio? One moment, please. So you can all reflect on whatever that passion was that you were thinking about earlier. Maybe you weren't totally sure what that issue was. You can think on that a little. Should I try again? Not going. Maybe we can unplug this and put the microphone to it. Thanks for bearing with us, everyone.
You have to plug in the microphone.
Okay. Let's just maybe leave it at that. Can you guys hear that? Cool. We're going to do that and just put the microphone towards the music. Is that cool? Going analog style.
A flood tide of filth is engulfing our country in the form of news and obscenity.
so we watched that video and weren't really sure what to expect. The Huffington Post said, despite Apple's ban on X-rated apps and Steve Jobs' promise to provide freedom from porn, a group of San Francisco street artists have put porn on the iPad. And we ended up getting 300,000 views on this video. And it was a reminder of the power of acting on an idea. I also just want to say, at the time we felt very strongly about fighting censorship, and Steve Jobs happened to be the face of that. But, may he rest in peace, and there's no, it feels a little funny to be talking about pornography and then this man that's passed away, this great design legend. But a big part of our process was to, we created the entire iPad experience from scratch. And we designed it and wrote it, and we wanted it to feel close enough to match what would look normal, so that someone walking by a bus stop might glance over at the ad and not necessarily recognize that it was co-opted, and then as they looked at it further, realize, oh, this is totally weird, and what the hell is going on here? How's the audio, by the way? I'm hearing a little feedback. Okay, cool, thank you. And yeah, it was just fun to imagine people walking by and checking that out, and so we really wanted to get the distortion right and people's fingers matching it up, so that was a lot of fun. CNET said it as a guerrilla tactic. Freedom from Porn's work is an undoubted success, and a little while later, Playboy launched an uncensored iPad app, which felt like a win. So the takeaway there is to take advantage of whatever resources are available. Had we not had that plotter printer, there's no way that we would have been able to create this. But using the resources we had, we were able to go forward and do it. And so if you're a musician that plays an instrument, or you're a web developer and you know how to code in a certain language, or if you have a drone camera, whatever it is that you have access to, maybe you have a friend that has a studio space, those are great things to take note of and to utilize. So this next project went down during the Occupy protests, and was in partnership with my good friend and fellow artist Andy Dow, who I also worked on Deprofiler with. And we were really excited about, or passionate about, raising awareness about the wealth disparity in America, and trying to think around what we could do to do that effectively, and realize that dollar bills are a really powerful medium because they naturally circulate. And so we thought, if we can talk about the wealth disparity on dollar bills, not only is it meta, but it also is something that the message will spread far and wide. And so our idea was to do a bunch of research, find the most compelling facts about the wealth disparity, and design infographics to then rubber stamp onto dollar bills. This is a mood board that we created. We wanted it to feel kind of classic Americana, official. We wanted red ink. And we also created this sort of survey that we passed to friends and a few family members. I like to say, whenever you're trying out an idea, share it with your friends, but also share it with your mom or someone from an older generation to make sure they get it. And we asked people, hey, what's working, what's not working, and we made changes accordingly. And then we ordered the stamps. And as we started putting ink in the pads and got our stamps wet, we were wondering, is this legal? And as Andy's one-bedroom apartment became covered, every horizontal surface was just covered with a dollar bill. We were like, well, let's hope so. And the truth is, we had no idea if it was legal or not, or what the ramifications would be. We were nervous, but our passion was greater than that fear. And so here are the final designs. This is the U.S. disparity of wealth, showing the richest 400 Americans have as much wealth as the bottom 150 million, which is a crazy stat. 400 people have as much wealth as 150 million. And we made sure that all the facts were available at occupygeorge.com, so people didn't have to take our word for it. They could go back to the site and then find the facts. This is the average worker pay in the top left, that little red square, versus the average CEO pay, which is the entire size of the bill. We like the idea of using the bill as a canvas. This is the share of income growth in America. And this shows the 1920s during the Great Depression versus the 1960s, and then in the 2000s, so you can see how that's flip-flopped a couple times. The U.S. distribution of wealth, and finally, the future property of the 1%. A little more tongue-in-cheek. And we knew that we'd live and die by the documentation. And so neither of us had ever done a studio-style photo shoot before. This was done in his apartment with a little light box. We borrowed a piece of plexiglass from a photographer friend, and we just kind of tinkered. I think on the other side of the bill is like a piece of gum and a couple just different things to stack it up and have it stand upright. But we had never done that before, and it was really just a matter of experimentation. Also, before I forget, I have the bills on me, so if you're interested in seeing some after the talk, I'm happy to share them. So we took these bills to protests, we stamped people's money, we created a site that we shared, and we also made it open source so that people could use the EPS files to create their own rubber stamps, and then also made templates that people could use their home printers to not stamp money, not print money, but print on money. And so I think one of the great things about social media is that you can get real-time feedback. You put something out there, and then you know what people think. And so someone says, these figures are actually terrifying. I'm starting to understand the Occupy protests, finally. And Bike Vegan says, if this doesn't make people wake up and think, nothing will. Didn't get any laughs from Bike Vegan, huh? Ben Cohen is a big fan of the project, and so he reached out and got to hang out with him a couple times from Ben & Jerry's. And he's actually gone on to create his own Stamping on Money project about getting money out of politics, which is awesome. And Time said, Occupy George gives the dollar bill a protest-friendly look. And so in addition to it being a big ego stroke whenever you have a project that goes far and wide, when it's aligned with a cause, then it's more so gratifying because as that news spreads, the message spreads. So that was really exciting for us. And we got to exhibit this at Ars Electronica in Austria, at the Brooklyn Museum in New York, and the Victoria and Albert Museum collected the bills into their permanent collection, which was a huge honor. They sold postcards at their gift shop. And if you ever wanted to know, artists do not make any money from the postcards sold at gift shops, which I did not know about. They did commission us to do a design for the £5 note, which was pretty neat. So that's Occupy Liz. And the takeaway there is the importance of getting out of your comfort zone. Had we stopped at that initial fear of not being sure if this was legal or not, we wouldn't have done it. And so it was really about pushing past that comfort zone. And to answer someone's point over there, it's questionably legal. Someone interviewed the U.S. Department of Stamping and Engraving, and they said while they didn't condone it, they would never prosecute it because we weren't rendering the bills unfit to be spent. Like we weren't covering up the serial numbers. So how's everyone doing? Go for it. All right. Thank you. Next project I want to talk about goes back to when the United States Supreme Court was ruling on same-sex marriage. And I was, don't ask me why, but having a conversation with Siri at the time. And I said, Siri, what's the definition of marriage? And she said in a very, I think her voice was more robotic then than it is now. She said, marriage is defined between a man and a woman, or the union between a man and a woman. And it felt really ironic that this robot from the future was giving me an outdated definition of marriage, right? And so some buddies and I decided to create our own definition of marriage, a more recent one, a revised one. And one that would be the formal union between two people. And so we created these as stickers and decided to just stick them into dictionaries on top of the definition. We went to a couple of bookstores and libraries around the San Francisco Bay Area and just made a really basic film about that and put it online. We also made the stickers open source so that people could, stick their own dictionaries if they wanted to. And it just felt like a fun project. Someone says, who do I know that has a printer? So again, cool to get real-time feedback with social media. Time to drag your dictionary into the 21st century, folks. And then this happened. And if we can get audio for this one, what's the best way of doing that? Sure. Try it. Should be going. Yeah, not playing though. Thanks for bearing with us.
We need to change the source to HDMI.
Okay. We're going technical, people. Here, I'll let you guys drive. Yeah. Looking at a background picture from Oaxaca, Mexico, circa 2010.
That should be HDMI. That's what they're telling us.
Okay. We could also always point the mic back onto the computer.
Okay. Okay.
Try it.
Can you mute this? Thank you. Unmute the video.
We've got one more video after this. So this Australian couple comes into the States for the first time ever, and they're driving on the left side of the road because in Australia, you drive on the left side of the road. And they're driving along, and a cop pulls them over because they're driving on the wrong side of the road. And the cop walks up and says, you can tell that they're Australian, says, what are you doing? Did you come here to die? And they say, no, mate, I came here yesterday. Cool, all good. All right. That's the one joke I got. So let's try this again.
New at 5, a new video posted online shows how a Bay Area group is getting crafty and making a social statement about same-sex marriage in the process. This movement is really a low-tech version of hacking. KTVU's David Stevenson is live in San Francisco to explain how these hackers are quite literally changing the definition of marriage. David.
Ken, that's right. The folks who've hacked this dictionary and ones inside this store are really remaking the definition of marriage. It's a movement to modernize the meaning of marriage using old-fashioned ink and paper. They call themselves Hack Marriage, and they recently posted this online video shot inside a San Francisco public library and several city bookstores. The group steadily hacks Oxford American dictionaries using adhesive paper to redefine marriage as between two people rather than husband and wife.
Yep. Another one there.
Alexander Book Company was unaware the hackers had hit them till we came to visit.
Because even if I take this off, the glue residue is going to stick on the paper. So as soon as I close it, those two pages are going to stick together. As soon as somebody opens it, it's going to be the end of that dictionary. 93. I'm sorry.
The store was able to save all 4 books. Others may not be so lucky. Sam.
They went to every single bookstore that we showed in the video and interviewed the store owners. So that was just kind of hilarious. So eventually Oxford Dictionary announced that it would in fact revise their definition of marriage, and BuzzFeed was nice enough to give us some credit in their post about that. And so, to me, if we were a percentage of, a fraction of a percentage responsible for helping that update sooner than it would have otherwise, that's a win. And, I think that it's all about putting little pieces of, pressure in the right direction where we want it to go. Really does, make a difference. And the takeaway here is to always consider the secondary audience. So how many people do you think would have seen these stickers had we not made a video and just put them into dictionaries? You can just shout it out. How many people? Probably around 12 over the course of like 20 years, right? Very few. And so by making that video and then putting it online, so many more people were able to see it. So that's always something I'm thinking about, is the importance of documentation. And so that brings us back to 2017, and how do we contribute and take a stance, whatever our political feelings are in this day and age. And I want to reflect a little bit on a brand context, and then I'll bring it back with a final personal project. So here's what not to do. What you shouldn't do is create a fake protest to sell a product.
Then place a reality TV star in your fake protest. And have that reality TV star give your product to a fake police officer to bring about fake unity. Pepsi pulls ad accused of trivializing Black Lives Matter. So this is from the New York Times. Pepsi has apologized for a controversial advertisement that borrowed imagery from the Black Lives Matter movement after a day of intense criticism from people who said it trivialized the widespread protests against the killings of black people by police. So they pulled the ad, and it was just a total shit show for them, PR-wise. And I think that speaks to the value of, like, you have to do stuff that's real and meaningful and not this, like, sort of fake. It's like the if you haven't watched that film, it gives me the creeps. And so what should you do if you're working with a brand, as I'm sure many of us do to pay our bills, myself included? Well, I think there's a number of ways you can go. I thought that Lyft, I applaud them for donating $1 million to the American Civil Liberties Union in response to the Muslim ban. Airbnb and Starbucks also contributed with some pretty noble efforts, from offering places for immigrants to stay, safe places, to pledging to hire a certain amount of immigrants. And with brands, there's a kind of an interesting balance, because it can be somewhat self-serving in a way, so how genuine is it? But I do think that something is better than nothing, and ideally it's being authentic to who they are as a brand, and especially responding to real-time, like actual events and issues, as opposed to fabricated fake ones. So last project, I've gone out to a few protests over the last few months, and I've been really inspired by the protest signs that I've seen. And as I walked around Oakland and just looked around, there's a lot of personality, a lot of character, and it felt really clear to me that there's an art to the protest. And my buddy Mike Reiner and I were really interested in figuring out how could we elevate the art of the protest. How could we take people's signs and, this is the one message that they want to share with the world that they're holding up in this act of, whether it's defiance or just expression. How can we amplify their voices? And so we had this idea of actually obscuring their faces and just focusing on the message itself. And the hope is that then people would be less judgmental about who it is, and hopefully someone from maybe the other side of the issue could be more empathetic if they're not seeing who that person is, they're just hearing about the message. And so real quick, we wanted to make a proof of concept. We found a protest that was happening in a couple days in San Francisco. It's the Facebook invite. And so we just went out there. We had a quick shot list and some questions. That's Mike interviewing someone. That's me shooting video. And we were just kind of trying to figure out, like, is this an idea that could work as a proof of concept, as a prototype? And then when we got in the edit, we were like, oh, we might have something here. What do we have to lose by just putting it out in the world? So we ended up making it, and we're going to try to get some audio again to have one more video. I think we can do it.
My mom, as my sign says, was a German immigrant. She was 11 years old. When she left Germany, she got here 11 days before Kristallnacht. If she had stayed another few weeks, she would have been dead.
This is the poster that went up in the Japanese American neighborhoods. Remind people of what had happened to Japanese Americans.
It can be rough, and I imagine it would be very scary to come to a new country. You don't have very many things. You don't know where you're going, and so I think the friendlier we can be, the better it is just for the whole world.
I'm here supporting religious freedom for everybody, and the reason I have this particular sign is because I feel like Christianity has been co-opted in a way that is misrepresenting what true Christian values are. But I certainly support all the religions who are here, especially Muslims.
I'm from Berkeley, but I'm originally from Palestine. we're all equal, we're all human beings, and like we all do the same thing either way. We're all gonna grow up one day, and we're all gonna die. So just like, why would we treat everyone different?
If everyone were to meditate, this world would not be as crazy as it is. Just silent your mind for about 2 minutes, and you'll be at peace.
Everything my father fought for years ago for the civil rights movement. So it just means that I'm not just going to sit back and be silent about it.
It was kind of my mom's idea, so I just put it on.
When I grew up in Virginia, I sort of identified as a Republican, so I want to invite those people to feel comfortable here.
If the fingers are pointed towards me some other day, I would be feeling ashamed because I wasn't standing up for those who are suffering at this point.
I wasn't going to make a sign, and I thought that my presence here alone would be something, but I'm the first person in my entire family born in the United States. I need to have a voice for my family who can't have one.
You know, there's a bunch of people from Syria and Iraq that lives suck right now, and they're innocent people, and we need to find a place for them. That's what America's about.
It was really cool to go from spending a day and checking this out, like checking out the protest, to then putting that together, putting it out in the world. And I want to reflect on a quick text conversation I had with my buddy Mike, where we were just talking about the idea, and I'm saying, like, I want to do something, I'm not sure what to do, and he's saying, don't give up, what about the signs? It's saying, what is it saying about the person protesting? And I'm saying, yeah, it's interesting, maybe it could be cool to juxtapose the sign and hearing people interview before seeing their faces. So we were still working out the idea. That was on a Wednesday. We ended up shooting on a Saturday and then edited it over the weekend and launched it early the following week. And, you know, it was a lot of late nights to put it together, but the feeling of, I mean, for anyone here, which is probably most of you that have stayed up late to ship an idea or a project in the world, I've yet to experience a drug that is more exciting and powerful than that feeling of knowing that, like, you've created something you're excited about and it's about to go out there. And we were really excited to see the response that it got, and that the feedback on it was that people were talking about the humanity behind it rather than the political issues that have been so divisive. Chelsea Quinton tweeted the video, which was a big aha moment for us. And in having one of the most important people in American politics, being able to reach them, to me is like, I've worked on projects for 7 months at a time that didn't have the reach that this project that was 5 days had. And so, you know, to me that just says that, like, anyone with a camera, which is like anyone with a smartphone in this day and age, does have the ability to reach far and wide. We like to think that she did watch the video with her mom and dad, and so we got to really and so I really hope, if nothing else, this notion of you can affect cultural change translates here today. And real fast kind of final thoughts. A lot of people will ask me after I give a presentation, well, it's great that you've done projects that have gotten press and gotten engagement, but what about the ones that have failed? And I absolutely have a ton of projects that have not gotten the engagement or recognition that I'd like. For instance, we went to Sacramento after doing this first film to do a whole Signs of the Times film about Planned Parenthood, and on both sides of that, and we ended up not getting enough content. So we had to wake up at 7 a.m., spend a whole Saturday going out there, and it ended up, we didn't put it out there. So you could say that was a waste of time, it was a failure. However, I really believe in this notion of failing harder and of everything being an experiment. And so we actually, I feel like it was a learning, and even though we didn't get to do anything with it, it was still part of the process. And so I find that mentality really helpful for me when I feel stuck, of just reminding myself it's okay, I'm just going to put it out in the world no matter what happens. And I want to leave you with a quote by the author of Culture Jam, Callie Lawson. He says, "Next time you're in a particularly soul-searching mood ask yourself this simple question. What would it take for me to make a spontaneous, radical gesture in support of something I believe in? Do I believe in anything strongly enough? Direct action is a proclamation of personal independence. In that moment of decision, in that leap into the unknown, you come to life. And so I hope that, there's a lot of different things we can do with our talents and our creativity. I hope that you'll feel inspired to commit to something that you care about and putting something out in the world. So thank you. You can follow along with my work to do socially driven projects at these places, and appreciate you guys for your time and for bearing with us on the technical stuff.